The gunshot was the last sound of his old life. It ripped through the canyon, a crack of thunder that sent crows scattering into the white-hot Arizona sky. Archer Blackwood's horse screamed, rearing up on its hind legs, trying to throw the devil from its back. He clung on, his world a blur of dust and panic, but the pain in his arm was a sharp, grounding anchor. Blood, dark and hot, soaked through his sleeve. A graze. Nothing compared to the real wound. The one that had torn his heart clean out of his chest. The Willix gang. They'd come out of the rocks like ghosts, guns blazing. He'd been a bounty hunter once. He knew the look of men with murder in their eyes. He'd left that life behind for Eliza, for peace, for a small ranch outside a town called Promise Creek. He'd been a fool to think his past wouldn't hunt him down. Now his wife, his Eliza, was lying still in the dirt, and beside her, a small bundle, stained with her mother's blood, was wailing. His daughter. Not even a month old. He slid from the saddle, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that echoed the final beat of his wife's heart. He knelt, pressing his lips to her forehead one last time. It was already cooling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words swallowed by the vast, empty landscape. "I should have protected you." The baby's cries sharpened, a blade twisting in his gut. She was alive. She needed him. With hands that shook so badly he could barely unwrap the swaddling, he picked her up. He looked at the horizon. The Willix boys were gone, for now. "Shh, little one," he murmured, his voice a raw rasp. Blood dripped from his arm onto the dusty ground. He had no idea what to do. Not the first clue. But he made a promise to the screaming infant in his arms, a promise sealed in blood and grief. "I'll figure it out." Promise Creek was half a day's ride, a lifetime away. He dug a grave with his bare hands and his hunting knife, the hard earth scraping his fingers raw. He made a cross from the splintered wood of their ambushed wagon. He said a prayer to a God he wasn't sure was listening anymore. Then he strapped his daughter to his chest in a makeshift sling and climbed back on his horse. "Your mama loved you something fierce," he told the whimpering child, "and I reckon I do too." But love wasn't going to feed her. The ride was a special kind of hell. His arm throbbed with every step the horse took. The baby screamed, a relentless, piercing sound of pure need. He tried to give her water from a handkerchief, a trick he'd seen once, but she mostly choked and cried harder. By the time the dusty outlines of Promise Creek appeared, he was delirious from blood loss, his mind a fever swamp of fear and despair. The baby had gone quiet, and her silence was 1,000 times more terrifying than her cries. He didn't even tie up his horse. He half fell, half jumped from the saddle and staggered toward the sign that read, "Doc Sullivan." He burst through the door, a wild man covered in dirt and blood, clutching a silent bundle. "Doc," he croaked. "Help!" A balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up, his face a mask of alarm. "Good Lord, Blackwood, what happened?" "Willix gang," Archer breathed, the world tilting. "Eliza, she's... but the baby..." His voice broke. He held out the bundle, a desperate offering. "She ain't eatin', she won't cry no more." Doc Sullivan rushed forward, his professional calm taking over. He took the infant, his movements quick and sure. "Let's have a look at you both. Sit down before you fall down, son." As the doctor unwrapped the baby, a woman rose from a chair in the corner. Archer hadn't even noticed her. She was plain, dressed in a simple blue frock, her honey-brown hair pulled back in a tight, practical braid. But her eyes were sharp. They missed nothing. "Doc," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Let me help with the child. You tend to Mr. Blackwood." The doctor gave a grateful nod. "Thank you, Miss Winter. That would be a godsend." Archer watched, his head spinning, as this Miss Winter took his daughter. There was a confidence in her hands, a practiced grace that spoke of experience. She didn't coo or fuss. She assessed. Temperature, breathing, the color of the baby's skin. "When did she last feed properly?" she asked, her gaze meeting his. It wasn't pity he saw. It was something else. An unnerving focus. "This morning," he mumbled. "Before." He couldn't finish. She nodded once, as if he'd confirmed a diagnosis. "She's hungry and dehydrated, but she's a fighter." She turned to the doctor's supply cabinet. "I'll prepare some sugar water. She needs milk, and soon." While Doc Sullivan cleaned the gash on Archer's arm, stitching it with neat, practiced motions, he told him about the woman. Willow Winter. Arrived 2 weeks ago. Her aunt runs the boarding house. Trained as a nurse back east. Boston. A foundling hospital of all places. "You're lucky she was here," the doctor said, wrapping a clean bandage around the wound. "She was just dropping off some linens for me." Lucky. The word felt like a curse. Archer's gaze was locked on the woman. She was feeding his daughter, drop by drop, from a small spoon. The baby, his little Emma, was actually swallowing. Her whimpers softened. Her tiny fist, which had been clenched tight, uncurled and wrapped around Miss Winter's finger. It was a miracle. A tiny, impossible miracle. But as he watched her, a sliver of ice slid into his gut. There was something about her, an efficiency that was almost cold, a stillness that didn't fit the chaos of the moment. "What's her name?" Miss Winter asked without looking up. Her focus was entirely on the baby. "Emma," Archer said, his throat tight. "After Eliza's mother." "Hello, Emma," the woman whispered, and for the first time a flicker of warmth touched her face. It vanished as quickly as it appeared. When the doctor was done, Archer pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. "Thank you, Miss Winter. I'll take her now." He needed to get away, to his ranch, to the silence of his empty home. She finally looked up at him, and her blue eyes were like chips of winter ice. "And how do you plan to feed her tonight, Mr. Blackwood? Do you have goat's milk? A bottle? Do you know how to sterilize it? Do you have clean cloths? Or will you just use another handkerchief?" Each question was a hammer blow, shattering his pathetic resolve. He had nothing. Eliza had handled everything. He was a rancher, a killer of men. He knew nothing of babies. The truth crashed down on him, a mountain of helpless ignorance. "I don't know," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. Her expression didn't soften. It became resolute. "I thought as much," she said. She stood, her posture straight, her chin lifted. "I will come with you to your ranch. I will teach you how to care for her." Archer stared at her. A complete stranger. A woman who looked at him not with sympathy, but with an intensity he couldn't decipher. "Why?" he asked. "You don't know me from Adam." "I know enough," she replied, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I know you have a daughter who will die if someone doesn't intervene. And I know I am the only one here who can." Doc Sullivan cleared his throat. "It's a generous offer, Blackwood. Unorthodox, but necessary. Little Emma needs a professional's care." Archer looked from the doctor's earnest face to the woman's unreadable one. He looked at his daughter, now sleeping in her arms, a fragile scrap of life. He had no pride left, no choice. "I'd be grateful," he said. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Good. We'll need supplies." She turned and started making a list, her voice crisp and businesslike, as if she were preparing for a campaign, not a rescue mission. And Archer couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, this quiet nurse from Boston, was more dangerous than any of the men who had left him for dead. She wasn't just helping him, she was taking control. The ride to the ranch was quiet, not peaceful. The silence was thick with unspoken things. Willow Winter, she'd insisted he call her Willa, rode with an easy confidence, his daughter Emma strapped to her chest. She didn't offer condolences. She didn't ask about Eliza. She asked practical questions. Does the cabin have a reliable stove? Is the well water clean? How many blankets do you own? It was like being interrogated. Archer found himself answering in clipped, one-word responses. The grief was a physical thing, a weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe, let alone make small talk with this strange, severe woman. He kept thinking about what he'd have to tell Emma someday. That her life began with her mother's death. That her father's past was a debt paid in blood. He'd killed 2 of the Willicks brothers in that firefight. The third, Travis, had gotten away. He would be back. Vengeance was a religion for men like that. As they neared the ranch, the small cabin he and Eliza had built with their own hands looked wrong. Empty. A tomb. "It ain't much," he said, the words tasting like an apology. "It will suffice," Willa replied, her eyes scanning the property, not with admiration, but with a strategic coolness, as if she were assessing a battlefield. Inside, the ghost of Eliza was everywhere, her shawl on the rocker, her half-finished sewing by the hearth. Archer had to turn away, a fresh wave of grief threatening to pull him under. He busied himself with the fire, pretending he couldn't feel Willa's eyes on him. She moved through his home with an unnerving efficiency. She didn't seem to notice the rustic poverty of it all. She unpacked the supplies from town, condensed milk, bottles, clean cloths, and laid them out on the kitchen table like a surgeon arranging her instruments. "First," she announced, "Emma will be fed. Second, you will eat something. And third, you will sit down before you bleed through that new bandage." Her tone left no room for argument. "I'm fine," he protested weakly, but the room was starting to spin. "You are not fine," she countered, her voice sharp as glass. "You are in shock, you are grieving, and you are a liability. Sit." He sank into a chair, mesmerized, as she prepared a bottle, tested the milk on her wrist, and fed his daughter with a calm expertise that was both miraculous and terrifying. She was a machine, a perfect, flawless nursing machine. "You said you were a nurse in Boston," he said, desperate to fill the silence, to find a crack in her armor. "What made you leave?" She didn't look at him. She was focused on burping Emma, her touch firm and precise. "I lost a patient I shouldn't have," she said. Her voice was flat, but for a split second he saw something flicker in her eyes. A shadow. "I needed a change of scenery." "So you came to Promise Creek? To help your aunt run a boarding house?" It didn't add up. A woman with her skills, her training. Why would she bury herself in a dusty corner of Arizona? She finally met his gaze and her eyes were cold again. "My aunt needed me. And as it turns out," she said, nodding toward Emma, "so did someone else. She was turning it back on him, evading. There was a story there, a dark one, he was sure of it. But then she did something that threw him completely off balance. She stood and held Emma out to him. 'You need to learn,' she said. 'Hold your daughter.' Panic seized him. He was a clumsy, broken man. What if he dropped her? I don't know how." "I will teach you." She didn't wait for him to agree. She placed the baby in his arms, arranging his hands, showing him how to support the fragile head. "There," she said. "She knows you. She feels your heart." Emma's eyes, blue like her mother's, stared up at him. And something inside Archer, something that had died in the canyon with Eliza, cracked open. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. "I'm sorry, little one," he whispered. "Your mama should be here." Willa turned her back, giving him the illusion of privacy. She moved to the stove, and by the time he had composed himself, she had a plate of beans and biscuits ready for him. They ate in silence. Afterward, she gave him his first lesson in changing a diaper, then another in swaddling. She was a patient teacher, her instructions clear and concise. But there was no warmth. It was all procedure, all technique. That night, the arrangement was a fresh hell of awkwardness. He insisted she take the bed, She insisted on a pallet on the floor by the fire. "I am your employee, Mr. Blackwood," she'd said. "This is the proper arrangement." It felt anything but proper. He lay in his own bed, the bed he had shared with Eliza, and listened to the soft sounds of this stranger caring for his child in the darkness. He heard her whispering to Emma. He heard the gentle rocking of the cradle he'd built, and once, in the dead of night, he heard another sound. A soft, muffled sob, quick and sharp, as if it had been bitten off before it could escape. She was crying. The perfect cold machine was crying in the dark, and Archer knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that Willa Winter was not in Promise Creek for a change of scenery. She was running from something, just like he was. The next few days were a blur. Willa established a routine with military precision, feedings, changings, naps. She taught Archer every step, observing him with a critical eye, correcting his fumbling attempts without judgment, but also without praise. He was a student. She was the instructor. That was all. He found himself watching her, trying to piece together the puzzle she presented. She spoke of Boston, of a fiancé, a doctor named William who had died of typhoid. The story was clean, tragic, and plausible. Too plausible. It was the little things that didn't fit. The way her eyes scanned the horizon when she stepped outside, the same way he did, looking for threats. The way she handled a kitchen knife with an efficiency that was more than just domestic. And a small, crescent-shaped scar just below her hairline, almost hidden by her severe hairstyle. One morning, while she was outside hanging laundry, he went through her bag. He felt like a snake, but he had to know. He found nothing, just spare clothes, a book of poetry, and a small, worn tin box. Inside the box was a single photograph, a man in a suit, handsome, with kind eyes. William, he presumed. But underneath it, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, was a stack of letters. He pulled one out. The handwriting was spidery, frantic. He only had time to read a few lines. "They know, Willow. They know what I did. You cannot stay in Boston. They will find you. Take the money and go west. Disappear." The letter wasn't signed. He put it back, his heart hammering against his ribs. She wasn't a grieving nurse. She was a fugitive. He was harboring a fugitive. He looked out the window at her, calmly pinning a diaper to the line, his daughter sleeping soundly in a sling on her chest. Who was she? What had her fiancé done? And who were they? The questions swirled in his head, a venomous cloud of suspicion. His life was already a powder keg, and he had just invited a lit match to live in his house. That afternoon, she confronted him. He was trying to mend a fence post, his wounded arm making the work slow and clumsy. "You were in my room," she said. It wasn't a question. He dropped the hammer, his guilt a hot flush on his face. He didn't deny it. "Who are you, Willa?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. She didn't flinch. She walked closer, her gaze steady. "I am the woman who is keeping your daughter alive," she said. "That should be enough for you." "It's not," he shot back. "I've got the Willix gang hunting me. I can't afford any more trouble. What did you run from?" Her mask of composure finally cracked. For a moment he saw the fear she kept so carefully hidden. "It has nothing to do with you," she whispered. "The hell it doesn't. You're in my house, with my daughter. Anything that's hunting you could come right to my door." He was shouting now, the fear and grief and suspicion boiling over into rage. "Who are they, Willa? Who is going to find you?" She took a step back, her face pale. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," he roared. Emma, startled by his voice, began to cry from her sling on Willa's chest. Willa's expression hardened again, the fear replaced by a fierce, protective anger. "You will not raise your voice in front of this child," she said, her voice dropping to a glacial whisper. "Your problems are out there. She gestured to the open range. "My problems are in the past. I will not have them endanger this baby. I will leave in the morning." She turned and walked back to the cabin, leaving him standing there, his own anger feeling hollow and childish. He had pushed too hard, and now he was going to be alone again. Utterly, terrifyingly alone with a baby he still barely knew how to hold. That night, the silence in the cabin was a living thing, a suffocating blanket of tension. He wanted to apologize, to beg her to stay, but his pride and his fear kept him silent. He lay awake for hours, listening to her quiet movements on the other side of the room. Just before dawn, he heard a floorboard creak. He sat up. She was standing by the door, her bag in her hand, silhouetted against the pale morning light. She was leaving, just like she said she would. But then she hesitated. She looked back at the cradle where Emma was sleeping. She stood there for a long moment, a statue of indecision. And Archer realized something. She wasn't just a fugitive hiding out. She cared about Emma. Maybe she cared too much. Whatever she was running from, leaving this baby was tearing her apart. He held his breath, waiting. The fate of his world, of his daughter's life, hung on the decision of this mysterious, broken woman. She took a deep breath, a shuddering, painful sound in the quiet cabin. Then she put her bag down. She didn't go back to her pallet. She walked over to his chair by the cold hearth and sat down, pulling a thin blanket around her shoulders. She would stay, for now. The unspoken truce was fragile, but it was there. He had his secrets, she had hers, and between them, a baby whose survival depended on them both. The morning brought visitors, 3 riders, materializing out of the morning mist. Archer's hand went to his gun before he recognized them. Marshal Jenkins from Promise Creek, his deputy, and Doc Sullivan. Relief was quickly replaced by dread. The law was at his door. Willa's door. He saw the flash of panic in her eyes before she smoothed it away, her face becoming a placid mask as she opened the cabin door. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice calm. "What a surprise." Marshal Jenkins, a stout man with a kind but weary face, took off his hat. "Miss Winter, didn't expect to find you still here." His eyes flickered from her to Archer, a question hanging in the air. "Mr. Blackwood still requires some assistance with the baby," she said smoothly. "She is a delicate child." Doc Sullivan stepped forward, all professional concern. "Just wanted to check on the little one," he said, moving toward the cradle. "And you, Archer, heard about Eliza. A terrible business." Archer nodded, his throat too tight to speak. While the doctor fussed over Emma, Marshal Jenkins drew Archer outside onto the porch. "We got word," the marshal said, his voice low. "Travis Willix was seen in Tucson. He's gathered a new crew. He's telling everyone who'll listen he's coming back to Promise Creek to finish the job." Ice coiled in Archer's stomach. "I figured as much." "You and the baby need to come to town," Jenkins insisted. "It's not safe out here. He knows this place." He paused, then his eyes narrowed slightly. "Archer, was there anything unusual about the ambush?" The question caught him off guard. "Unusual? They shot my wife and tried to kill me. Seems pretty straightforward." "It's just..." The marshal hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They didn't take your horses, didn't take the valuables from your wagon. Most outlaws would strip you clean. The Willix boys. They were looking for something." Archer stared at him. He hadn't thought of that. In his grief, the details had been a blur. But the marshal was right. They hadn't robbed them. They had just killed or tried to. "I don't know what they'd be looking for," Archer said, but a new, cold seed of doubt was planted in his mind. Before he could ask more, the cabin door opened. Willa stood there, holding a tray with 3 cups of coffee. She offered one to the marshal, her smile pleasant, but her eyes were fixed on Archer, and he knew she had heard everything. Later, after the men had left, after Archer had agreed to bring Emma to town the next day, the tension in the cabin was unbearable. "They were looking for something," he said, watching her. Her back was to him as she washed the coffee cups. Her shoulders were rigid. What did Eliza have that a man like Travis Willix would want? She was silent for a long time. "I have no idea," she said finally, her voice tight. She was lying. He knew it as sure as he knew his own name. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron, her face pale but determined. "The marshal is right, Archer. You are not safe here. We should leave for town immediately." "We?" he asked. "You were ready to leave this morning." "Things have changed," she said. "Travis Willix is not just some vengeful cowboy. If he's looking for something, he is far more dangerous than you realize." How would she know that? How could a nurse from Boston know anything about the motivations of a killer like Travis Willix? Unless her past, and his, were connected in a way he couldn't yet see. The pieces were all there, scattered and meaningless, but he felt a terrifying pattern beginning to emerge. Eliza, the Willix gang, a mysterious object, and Willa Winter, the woman who appeared out of nowhere, the woman with secrets in her eyes and a past that was hunting her down. He looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully in her cradle, oblivious to the storm gathering around them. He had ridden into Promise Creek to save her, but now he knew. The real danger wasn't behind them. It was waiting for them. And this woman, this stranger under his roof, was somehow at the very center of it all. The boarding house in Promise Creek felt like a gilded cage. Willa's aunt, a stern woman named Margaret, took one look at Archer and sniffed with disapproval. But her face softened when she saw Emma, and she gave them a room at the back, away from the other guests. For the first time since the ambush, Archer was separated from Willa. She had her own room across the hall. The silence was deafening. He felt exposed, vulnerable. He had grown used to the quiet sound of her breathing in the darkness. He met with Marshal Jenkins that evening. The plan was simple. Archer would make himself a target, walk the streets, be visible. The marshal would have deputies posted on the rooftops, ready. They were setting a trap. But Archer couldn't shake the feeling that he was the bait in a trap far more complex than the marshal understood. "What aren't you telling me, Jenkins?" he asked, cornering the marshal in his office. "What did you mean? They were looking for something." The marshal sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "There are rumors," he said reluctantly, "that your wife, Eliza, that before she married you, she was involved with a man, a geologist, surveying for the railroad. He disappeared about a year ago. Some say he found a big strike. Gold. And that he left the map with her for safekeeping." Archer felt the floor drop out from under him. Eliza? Involved with another man? It was impossible. She was a preacher's daughter, pious, pure. "That's a damn lie," he said, his voice shaking with anger. "Maybe," the marshal conceded, "but Travis Willix's older brother, the one you brought in, he was part of that geologist's crew. Maybe he thought Eliza had the map. Maybe Travis still does." It made a sick kind of sense. It explained why they hadn't robbed him. They weren't after money. They were after a fortune. He stormed back to the boarding house, his mind reeling. He found Willa on the back porch, rocking a fussy Emma. "Did you know?" he demanded, his voice low and raw. "Did you know Eliza might have had a map?" She looked up at him, her face unreadable in the twilight. "I've heard the rumors," she said quietly. "And you didn't think to tell me?" he snarled. "You let me think this was all about some old bounty, some blood feud?" "What good would it have done?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Would it have brought her back? Would it have made this threat any less real? All that matters now is keeping Emma safe." "Emma," he breathed, a horrifying thought dawning on him. They had torn their wagon apart, searched Eliza's body. What if they thought? What if the map wasn't a piece of paper? What if it was something small, something you could hide on a baby? He looked at his daughter, and his blood ran cold. The swaddling cloths, the locket Eliza always put around her neck. He lunged forward, his hands clumsy as he fumbled with the tiny gold locket. "Archer! No!" Willa cried, trying to stop him. He pushed her aside. He pried open the locket. Inside there was no miniature portrait. Instead, folded into a tiny square, was a piece of oiled canvas. He unfolded it. It was covered in strange symbols and lines. A map. It had been with Emma the entire time, hanging around her neck. He looked up at Willa, his eyes wide with horror and a dawning, terrible understanding. "How did you know?" he whispered. "The rumors weren't just in town. You knew before you ever came here." The fight went out of her. She sank onto the porch steps, her face ashen. "Because the geologist," she said, her voice barely audible. "The man who disappeared. He was William." The name hit him like a physical blow. William, her fiancé, the doctor who died of typhoid in Boston, the man in the photograph. It was all a lie. A carefully constructed, intricate lie. "He wasn't a doctor," Archer stated, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. She shook her head, tears finally tracing paths down her cheeks. "He was a geologist and a thief. He double-crossed his partners. The Willix gang. He stole the map to a claim they all discovered together. He sent it to the one person he thought he could trust, a woman he'd met in town, a preacher's daughter he'd charmed, Eliza. The name was a poisoned dart. His wife, his pure, sweet Eliza, entangled in a web of greed and betrayal." "And you?" Archer asked, his voice dead. "Who are you?" "I'm his sister," she whispered. "Willow. William. Our parents had a sense of humor. When he disappeared, I knew his partners would come looking for the map. I got a letter he'd sent before he vanished, telling me everything. Telling me he'd left the map with a woman in Promise Creek. I came here to find it. To get it back before they could." She looked up at him, her eyes pleading. "Then I walked into Doc Sullivan's office and saw you. I saw the baby, and I realized I was too late." The world had tilted on its axis. The woman who had saved his daughter, who had lived in his home, who he was beginning to feel something for, was the sister of the man who had gotten his wife killed. She hadn't come to Promise Creek to escape her past. She had come to find a treasure map. She had used him, used his grief, and every moment, every lesson, every shared silence had been a lie. He felt nothing, just a vast, cold emptiness. He looked from the map in his hand to the woman crying on his porch, to his daughter, now sleeping in her cradle. This tiny, innocent child was the key. She was the prize, and the wolves were circling. Travis Willix wasn't just coming for revenge. He was coming for his fortune, and he would tear the whole town apart and kill anyone, including a baby, to get it. The trap the marshal was setting was a joke. They were waiting for a gunfight. But this was never about guns. It was about greed, and Archer was standing right in the middle of it, with the one thing they wanted most in the world. He made a decision. A cold, hard decision born of betrayal and desperation. He folded the map and put it back in the locket, securing it around Emma's neck. He looked at Willa, his eyes like chips of flint. "You're going to help me end this," he said. "Tonight. You got my family into this mess. You're going to help me get my daughter out." For 3 days, the town of Promise Creek held its breath. Archer walked the streets, a ghost in broad daylight, the locket heavy under Emma's blankets whenever he carried her. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every unfamiliar face was a potential killer. Willa stayed at the boarding house, her face a pale, strained mask. The truce between them was colder than a grave. They were partners, bound by necessity. Nothing more. Archer knew the marshal's plan was useless. Travis Willix wasn't going to ride down Main Street with guns blazing. He was smarter than that. Cunning. He would find a weakness, a back door, and Archer knew what the weakness was. Doc Sullivan. The good doctor had a tremor in his hands that wasn't from old age. He had debts at the saloon. He was a man who could be squeezed. Archer started watching him, and what he saw made his skin crawl. The doctor was making quiet trips to the edge of town after dark. He was leaving messages under a loose stone in the wall of the livery stable. The night of the third day, Archer followed him. He saw the doctor retrieve a small pouch from under the stone. Money. He was on the Willocks payroll. The man who had stitched Archer's arm, who had pronounced Emma healthy, was a traitor. He had likely been feeding Willocks information from the very beginning, information about him, about Willa, about the baby. Archer confronted him in his office. He didn't draw his gun. He just stood in the doorway, blocking the only exit. "How much are they paying you, Doc?" he asked, his voice quiet. The doctor's face crumpled. "Blackwood. They made me. They know about my brother back in Ohio, the trouble he's in. They promised to help him if you just help them kill a man and steal from his baby?" Archer finished. The doctor started sobbing, a pathetic, broken sound. "He's not going to attack the town," the doctor blubbered. "That's not the plan. He wants you to run. He wants you to take the baby and try to get away. He'll have men waiting on the trail, away from the marshal's eyes." It was a classic ambush. Isolate the target. Eliminate them quietly. Take the prize. And that's when Archer's own plan, a desperate, dangerous gamble, finally took shape. He went back to the boarding house. The full moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the street. He found Willa in her room packing a small bag. For Emma. "He's making his move tonight," Archer said. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear. "Doc Sullivan is their inside man. He told them everything." "What do we do?" she whispered. "We do exactly what they expect us to do," he said. "We run." He explained the plan in low, urgent whispers. She listened, her face growing paler with every word. It was insane. It was suicide. But it was the only chance they had. "Can you do it?" he asked her. "Can you ride hard and not look back no matter what you hear?" She looked at Emma, sleeping in a makeshift cradle in the corner. Her expression hardened. The fear was replaced by that same fierce resolve he'd seen before. "For her?" she said. "I can do anything." An hour later, two figures slipped out the back of the boarding house. They moved through the alleys, silent as ghosts, toward the livery stable. One figure was tall, wearing Archer's duster and hat. The other was smaller, carrying a bundled blanket that looked just like a baby. They saddled two horses, the fastest in the stable, and rode out of town, heading west, just as Doc Sullivan had told Willocks they would. But the tall figure wasn't Archer. It was Marshal Jenkins. And the smaller figure wasn't Willa. It was his deputy. And the bundle was just blankets. Archer and Willa were still in town. They were hidden in the hayloft of that same livery stable watching the street. Emma was with them, bundled tightly against Willa's chest, a single drop of laudanum from the doctor's bag on a cloth to ensure she slept through the night. They watched as three men detached themselves from the shadows across the street, Travis Willocks and two of his hired guns. They weren't watching the road out of town. They were watching the boarding house. The ambush on the trail was a lie, a misdirection. The real target was always Willa. Travis knew who she was. He knew she was William's sister. He figured she was the one who really knew about the map, and that Archer was just a complication. He was going to let Archer escape, then circle back, grab Willa, and torture the location of the map out of her. It was a brutal, simple plan, and it would have worked. "They're going in," Willa breathed as the men started to cross the street. "Let them," Archer said, his hand steady on the rifle in his lap. "The trap is set." The front door of the boarding house burst open. Willocks and his men stormed inside. The building remained dark and silent. Too silent. After a moment, a single light appeared in an upstairs window. A lantern. The signal. Archer took a deep breath. He sighted down the barrel of his rifle at the front door. "Now," he said. From the rooftops on either side of the street, 2 more rifles opened fire. Not at the boarding house, but at the alleys, pinning them in, cutting off their escape. Panic erupted inside the house. A man burst out the front door, firing blindly into the night. Archer's rifle bucked against his shoulder. The man went down. Another appeared in a side window. The marshal's rifle cracked from the roof of the bank. The second man disappeared. Then Travis Willicks stumbled out onto the porch, dragging a hostage in front of him. It was Willa's aunt, Margaret, a gag in her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "Stop shooting!" Willicks screamed, his voice raw with fury. "Stop shooting or the old woman dies! Jenkins, I know you're up there. You tell Blackwood to get his cowardly hide out here, him and the girl, or I swear I'll start sending the residents out one piece at a time." The shooting stopped. A horrible, ringing silence fell over the street. Archer's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the part he hadn't planned for. Hostages. "Stay here," he whispered to Willa. "Do not move, no matter what." He slid down the ladder from the hayloft, his rifle in his hands. He stepped out of the livery stable into the moonlight. "Here I am, Travis," he called out, his voice steady. "Let the woman go. This is between us." Willicks laughed, a high, unhinged sound. He pressed the barrel of his revolver to Margaret's head. "It was always between all of us, Archer. My brother, your wife, my map. I want the girl, William's sister. Send her out or Grandma gets it." From the hayloft, Archer heard a small, muffled sob. Willa. He was trapped. He couldn't risk Margaret's life. He was about to call out, to agree, when a movement from the boarding house porch caught his eye. It was Doc Sullivan. He staggered out, his face a mess of blood and bruises. He must have been inside when the attack started. "Don't do it, Travis," the doctor pleaded. "Leave the townspeople out of this." "Stay out of it, old man," Willicks snarled, his attention diverted for a split second. But a split second was all Willa needed. A dark shape moved with impossible speed from the shadows of the stable. It wasn't Archer. It was Willa. And she wasn't holding a baby. She was holding a shotgun she'd taken from the livery office. She had disobeyed him. She had come for him. "Let my aunt go," she said, her voice shaking but clear. The shotgun was steady in her hands, pointed right at Travis Willicks's chest. Willicks's eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then greed. "The sister," he sneered. "Come for your brother's treasure? Hand over the map, and maybe I'll let you all live." "The map is gone, Travis," Willa lied, her voice ringing with conviction. "It burned with the wagon. There's nothing left for you." It was a standoff. 3 people in a deadly triangle. Archer, with his rifle trained on Willicks. Willicks, with his pistol to an old woman's head. And Willa, with a shotgun that could cut him in half. But Archer saw something Willicks didn't. In that moment, Willa wasn't a nurse from Boston. She wasn't a grieving sister. The way she held that gun, the look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had seen violence before, who knew how to use it. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The scar on her forehead. The frantic letter. "They know what I did." It wasn't William the letter was talking about. It was her. Then all hell broke loose. Doc Sullivan, in a final desperate act of redemption, lunged at Willicks. He wasn't trying to fight. He was just trying to get in the way. Willicks, enraged, shoved Margaret aside and fired his pistol into the doctor's chest. The shot echoed through the street, and in that same instant, with Willicks's aim diverted, Willa and Archer fired as one. Travis Willicks was thrown backward by the combined force of a rifle bullet and a shotgun blast. He hit the wall of the boarding house and slid to the ground, a stunned look on his face. He was dead before he landed. Silence. Then from Willa's chest, a small, sleepy cry. Emma was waking up. The battle for Promise Creek was over. The aftermath was a quiet, grim accounting. Doc Sullivan was dead, a hero in the end. Margaret was shaken but unharmed. The rest of Willicks's gang surrendered. As the sun rose, casting a clean, unforgiving light on the scene, Archer walked over to Willa. She was sitting on the steps of the livery, rocking Emma, her face smudged with gunpowder. The shotgun lay on the ground beside her. "Boston," he said quietly. "Typhoid didn't kill your fiancé, did it?" She didn't look at him. She just kept rocking the baby. "No," she whispered. "William. He got in over his head with some very bad men. Gamblers. Loan sharks. They came to our apartment to collect. They were going to kill him. I was a nurse. I knew anatomy." She finally looked up, and her eyes were haunted. "I knew exactly where to put the knife so they would bleed out quickly. There were two of them." William panicked and ran. "He sent me that letter, then disappeared. I've been running ever since." So that was her secret. Not a fugitive, but a killer. A woman who had killed to protect the man she loved, just as she had been willing to kill tonight to protect her aunt, to protect him, to protect Emma. He looked at this woman, this complete and utter mystery, who had saved his life, his daughter's life, and his town. Everything he thought he knew about her was a lie. And yet, the one thing that felt real was the fierce, desperate courage he had just witnessed. He knelt in front of her. He gently took the locket from around Emma's neck and opened it. He took out the map. "Is this what your brother died for?" he asked. "What my wife died for?" She looked at the small piece of canvas as if it were a snake. "It's a curse," she said. He didn't hesitate. He walked over to the lantern that was still burning on the porch, opened the glass, and held the map to the flame. It curled, blackened, and turned to ash. Willa stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. A fortune. Gone. Just like that. "It's over," he said. "The map is gone. The Willicks gang is gone. Your past is ash." He walked back and sat beside her on the steps. Emma had fallen back asleep. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. "Now," he said, looking at the sunrise, "we start over. All of us." He reached out, and for the first time took her hand. Her fingers were cold, but she didn't pull away. He didn't know who she was. Not really. She was a liar, a killer, a runaway. But she was also brave and loyal, and she loved his daughter. In the wreckage of their lives, surrounded by secrets and death, that felt like enough. It felt like hope. 3 months later, Archer Blackwood stood on the porch of his ranch, watching Willa hang laundry on the line. Emma, now a chubby, gurgling baby, sat at her feet in a basket, playing with a wooden spoon. The cabin had been repaired. The painful memories of Eliza were still there, but they were softer now, overlaid with new memories. The memory of Willa teaching him how to bake biscuits, the sound of her singing a lullaby to Emma by the fire, the sight of her smile, which was rare, but when it came, it was like the sun breaking through the clouds. The town had talked, of course. They whispered about the strange Boston nurse who handled a shotgun like a veteran. They whispered about the fortune in gold that had vanished into smoke. But they also saw a man who had lost everything find a way to go on. They saw a baby who should have been an orphan, thriving and loved, and eventually the whispers died down, replaced by a grudging respect. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, he finally asked her. "Willa," he said, his voice quiet, "I don't know what the future holds, and I know my past is just as complicated as yours, but I don't want to face it alone anymore." He took her hand. "Marry me. Be a mother to Emma. Be my wife." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they weren't tears of fear or grief. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "You know what I am, what I've done." "I know you saved us," he said simply. "That's all that matters." She didn't give him an answer right away. Instead, she stood up, walked to the edge of the porch, and looked out at the vast, sprawling territory. She looked like she was saying goodbye to something, to the woman who had run from Boston, to the ghost of William. When she turned back to him, her eyes were clear. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." Their wedding wasn't in the church. It was right there on the ranch with Marshall Jenkins officiating and her Aunt Margaret as the only witness. Willa wore a simple blue dress, the same one she'd been wearing the day he met her. Archer held Emma in his arms, and as he said his vows, he wasn't just making a promise to Willa. He was making a promise to this new, strange, beautiful family that had been forged in fire and blood. That night, as he held his new wife in his arms, he knew there would still be ghosts. There would still be scars. But for the first time since that gunshot had echoed through the canyon, his heart felt whole. He had ridden into Promise Creek with a dying baby, looking for a doctor. And somehow he had found a second chance, a new life, a promise of his own. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West and believe that new beginnings can rise from the ashes of the past, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You never know what story is waiting just around the bend.